What's up, wrestling fans? It is time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.com. You can tell I'm sporting my Mavericks hat right there. I'm very proud of my boys. They made it to the playoffs, and that's probably as far as they're going to go. But my Dallas Mavericks, very, very happy about them. So I had to sport them and everything, and just say that, way to go, Dirk. You're the man. Still, just got a new cat, naming it Dirk, and that's how things roll in the Chisholm household. However, that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about pro wrestling, I think. And as always, I'm joined by Nick Paglino, senior editor of WrestleZone.com. Nick, are you there, man? What's going on?
I'm here. What's up, Chris? What's up, wrestling fans? Good to be back on the show live. I'm sporting my Detroit Red Wings gear because they made the playoffs for the 23rd straight year. And I think after what we saw at WrestleMania, we can now say that the Red Wings are the only ones that are keeping the streak alive.
That is true. I wasn't aware. In my Mavericks at one point they reached the playoffs for so many years in a row until last year. So that's not good. By the way, I do want to give a shout out. We'll probably go to him some throughout the show tonight. Just flew in all the way from, I don't even know where the guy was from, actually. He just got on a flight and I picked him up, but he is in the studio. Mike Killam, and he wanted to show us that he is sporting, I don't know what that is.
It's a Chicago Blackhawks jersey. No, very few people know what that is. It's a group of people that hang out in like the slums of Illinois, and they know
the Stanley Cup champs. Is that who it is?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Read the sign, Nick.
I tell you what, though, we do have a big show planned tonight. Mike Killam is in the house, and we'll be coming and getting his opinion on some of the things, obviously. And by the way, I do want to say, in the archive version of our show, you need to check it out. I'm going to be posting a video that Will made up for tonight's show. It's an Ultimate Warrior tribute edition of our intro and stuff like that. It'll be put in the archive version, so make sure you check that out. Really, really well done. And I want to, of course, start by addressing the big news coming off of last week's Monday Night Raw, the very next day after, just an eerie situation after his Hall of Fame induction that weekend, and of course his appearance on Raw. Warrior, he had legally changed his name, so Warrior, the Ultimate Warrior, of course, Jim Hellwig, died of what, Nick, I believe you just reported, the catastrophic medical event that people were reporting originally when he first was pronounced dead, I believe, was just revealed today as what most people thought it was a heart attack, correct?
A massive heart attack, yeah, brought on by heart disease.
I don't know. I posted it somewhere on Twitter or something. I remember Warrior from as a kid. He was, in my mind, I liked him better than I liked Hogan at that time. I remember, running down to the ring, going to the back trampoline and stuff like that more than I remember worrying about dropping a leg drop in the fake matches that we had with our friends and stuff like that, shaking the ropes and everything. I was always a huge Warrior fan. And I guess some people have called it, now that it's kind of the news worn off, Nick, some people have kind of called it poetic in a sense of how it went down. And all I will know is as much of a travesty as it was at least great that at the end of the day, he got to be honored and recognized for everything that he did contribute, compared to how it would have been left off had he not had the Hall of Fame this year, had he not had Raw the next night, and the way WWE had presented his career, obviously with that first DVD and some of the things that that had been said about him and done, regardless of what he was like as a person, which nobody really knows him except for those that obviously do. But as fans, it's really great that he got the recognition that he did.
Absolutely. If you have to look at a silver lining in something like this. And What it is he was able to, as he said, as a lot of guys said after the WrestleMania weekend, he was able to make peace with a lot of guys that he had, maybe not spoken to in a while, or who he maybe had beef with. He was able to sort of bury the hatchet with WWE, Vince McMahon, get inducted into the Hall of Fame, come out on Raw, cut that final promo, which, just the words in that promo were just very, you use the word eerie a lot, but they really were, just in hindsight now and in looking at how everything transpired then just 24 hours after Raw. But again, looking at that silver lining, he was able to have that send-off. He was able to make peace with those guys. And at the very least, you can say he was able to have that. Because yes, Chris, could you imagine if he had passed away and the only thing we remember is that first DVD that WWE put out? Because, if we were going to talk a little bit about memories of The Ultimate Warrior, one of the things I wanted to talk about is the new DVD that just came out. And thank God we have that. And we know that we have that DVD now because they've patched up their relationship. And there was just some remarkable stuff on that new DVD that they just put out, and some of the interviews that he had were tremendous. And it really reveals what a wrestling mind he was, and the intelligence and respect that he had for the business of pro wrestling. And I'm really glad that, that's the note that he went out on, and not that original DVD that he had nothing to do with, that was, very one-sided on WWE's part.
Just very, very shocking, and which kind of leads me to something that I think, Nick, I really definitely wanted to address after the fact, and then we'll get into some of the other topics and everything. There's been some Sting updates and some stuff coming out that I wanted to talk about tonight. But some of the coverage, obviously, and every time this stuff comes up, it reminds me of, I guess, what mainstream media and those that cover it or a part of it, how they cover pro wrestling, and in my mind, very insulting, bad journalism in a lot of cases. And even good journalists and stuff have such this bias against pro wrestling that it clouds their judgment. And of course, a guy like Colin Cowherd on ESPN, but obviously the big one from this week covering the Ultimate Warrior's death was Nancy Grace, and some of the things that she said, and some of the accusations that she at least implied. I know, Nick, you were covering a lot of it this week on WrestleZone. And I guess my question to you, Nick, and I wouldn't mind getting Mike's thought on this as well in a minute. Do you think that part of it is justified? Now let's take our own bias out of this, okay? Now obviously the just inaccurate way that she kind of implied Owen Hart's death and a couple of the others that were on that list were involved. Let's take that just bad journalism out of it and the way that she wanted to imply it. But obviously steroids is something that is a big deal in pro wrestling, and it has been for a long time. So it's not as if what some of the things that they say is completely off base. But I guess my question is, Nick, when you look at some of the harsh things, and on our end, obviously it was so quickly after he had passed, that's why a lot of people, criticized her for what she said and how she said it and when she said it. But in my mind, Nick, I do think part of it is justified to an extent. And a lot of people, there was a guy from New York Times, what was his name? Was it Muchnick or something? Sam Muchnick?
Yeah, Phil
Muchnick. Has always been very critical of Vince McMahon, very harsh and insulting toward him, to an extent of it is somewhat Vince's fault, with the way that the business is operated and the way that it's ran, that guys have this subconscious idea even that they have to be big physically or larger than life, because at the end of the day, as more information gets released, I would imagine that Warrior's past steroid use was a potential factor. I mean, maybe that's not a guarantee, and we don't know that. So unlike Nancy Grace, common sense people won't speculate. But at the same time, that is something that's been known to happen in pro wrestling. It is a little bit more rampant than maybe other particular sports, even to a degree, Nick. So I just guess my question to both of y'all, and Nick, we'll start with you. Do you feel like some of the coverage and some of the criticism toward Vince McMahon and or WWE and or pro wrestling in general, do you think it's justified?
Absolutely. And we talked about this before. Nancy Grace made two key mistakes when she did her coverage of the Ultimate Warrior's passing. Number one, she didn't wait for the autopsy to come back. You have to wait until you have the facts. For all we know, absolutely, like it said, it looked to everyone, he clutched his chest like it was a heart attack. But for all we know, the guy could have choked on a piece of bubble gum. We don't know exactly what happened until the autopsy results come back. Are we still here?
Yeah, I'm here, man. Just your video's kind of cutting in and out, but yeah, go ahead.
All right, well, as long as you can hear me. So number one, she was too quick to jump on and capitalize on the hoopla of the story. It was a big breaking story. And so instead of taking her time and waiting for all the facts to come out, she said, well, I got to jump on this right now, and I've got to grab the audience. I got to grab this story right now. I've got to capitalize on it while it's a quote-unquote hot scoop before the actual facts of how he died come in. So that was the number one mistake that she made, because if she had waited for the autopsy results to come in, and now we know that he died of a heart attack, as a result of heart disease, and we know factually, scientifically, that steroid use and or abuse is linked to heart disease, then she could have brought someone like DDP on and said, in light of what we know, do you think Warrior's past steroid use, which he has admitted to, could have played a part in his death or in his heart attack? And that would have been the more semantically correct question to ask, as opposed to what she did. The second thing she did, and this is exactly what Colin Cowherd does, she lumped all professional wrestlers into the same pool of person. And we have to remember, guys like the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, they come from the steroid era of professional wrestling. And that's not the way it is anymore. We're not in the steroid. And now, I don't know for sure. There might still be guys there that are using some of these massive guys. Maybe they are. But, if we're to trust the WWE wellness policy, then we're beyond that. Baseball, a lot of sports have gone through steroid eras. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Jose Canseco, they lived through the baseball steroid era. And so it's wrong, and the biggest glaring mistake she made was when she called Ultimate Warrior WWE Superstar. Now, all right, technically he had just signed a Legends deal. He is, but he's not a current WWE Superstar. This is a guy who hasn't wrestled in the ring for years. He comes from a different era. The steroid use was a long time ago, and there was no evidence to support that he's using steroids or drugs now. And, of course, the autopsy has now revealed that he was not on any kind of drugs or alcohol when he died. So she made those two major mistakes. But yes, Chris, to answer your question, and I think Colin Cowherd talked a little bit about this too, when he said his quote was something along the lines of professional wrestlers take risks with their lives. Well, that's a very general thing to say. They take risks with their lives just getting in the ring and wrestling. Yeah, right. So does any sports star. But when you talk specifically about using drugs or performance-enhancing drugs or steroids, he's right. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, pro wrestlers did take major risks and major gambles with their lives when they were using drugs. But the thing is, we don't know what was going on at the time. We don't know how these guys got the drugs. We don't know if these guys were buying drugs off the street corner or if WWE doctors were prescribing these drugs to them. We don't know the specifics of how and why, so it is very, very premature and uninformed of us to make those kinds of judgments, I think, like Nancy Grace and Colin Cowherd were doing.
Mike, what are your thoughts about the way they covered it, and how much it's justified or not in your mind?
there's a difference between justified and just plain old awful journalism. I mean, Colin straight out misrepresented CM Punk in another recent article, which it turned out to be a CM Punk fan site on Twitter. So his journalistic integrity regarding the subject of pro wrestling is definitely not on par with what it should be. But I think, I mean, there is a legitimate concern, and what I would like to see WWE do more of is pushing their wellness policy more to the mainstream media, because, I mean, you talk about mainstream wrestling fans. The difference between IWC fans and mainstream wrestling fans has kind of been blurred since there's only, 3 or 4 million of us actually still watching Raw every week. But the mainstream, when they hear wrestling and steroids and dying, I mean, they all kind of go hand in hand. We know, as fans that have been watching and paying attention to the inside of WWE's product, that it's very different. But, I mean, give me one single sport outside of maybe golf, and I don't even know because I don't follow it, that hasn't been a major subject of either steroids or some other performance enhancer in the last couple of years. I mean, when the general public hears a sporting event and B, something to do with performance enhancers, it's a big deal, and that leaves a lasting impression on the business. I mean, look at the cyclist guy that just basically got all of his world records taken. Is Armstrong?
Yep.
Just, I mean, quote unquote, the greatest cyclist that's ever lived, and now he's basically an asterisk in the history books. I would like to see WWE kind of step up and go, look, this isn't publicly acknowledged the way it was, and publicly acknowledge the way it is, because there's not a lot of, baseball players get fined all the time for this, and then life moves on and more people get caught and they get fined, and then they come back in 6 months and nothing has changed. But the WWE has actually taken step by step to, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but they've taken steps to resolve this and make the entire industry a better place. So I think there's a conversation to be had, but I think it also, I mean, the general person on the street isn't going to go out of their way to see what WWE's policy on steroids is.
Well,
so
I think that's the part where, for me, it's like if you're a fan of the product, you're probably a lot more lenient and understanding. If you've got a major bias toward pro wrestling in general, you just don't understand it. Colin Cowherd is one of those guys.
That's what it is.
That can't get past the fact that it's fake. It's a fake
That's what it
sport.
Is.
That's why, that trumps like reality in a lot of ways, and you just don't like something.
That's what lets them get away. If you told Colin Cowherd, if someone, and I'm sure someone did inform him, you quoted CM Punk's Twitter account, but it wasn't really CM Punk's Twitter account, he'd probably say, "Who cares?
Yep.
I don't care." They don't care. When you're talking about pro wrestling, you don't need to report facts. Because I guarantee you their argument back to you is, well, it's fake, so I can be fake if I'm reporting about it. They still are wrapped up in this word fake. The show, in that regard, it's like I don't come out and write a blog about, and I think I've probably said this on the show a million times. I don't come out, the day after an episode of, Friends aired when Chandler and Monica had a baby and say, "Hey, everybody, Chandler and Monica did not actually have a baby," because it's two actors playing the roles of Chandler and Monica. When are they going to realize or just accept the fact that it's a television show? So I think, and I don't think, this is a sort of a different argument, because I think a lot of the guys that are at the age of somebody like a Colin Cowherd, I think they probably went to pro wrestling events when they were young. I think their parents probably took them. And that was back in a day when kayfabe was still very popular. And really, even a lot of adults back in the 60s, 70s, they thought pro wrestling was real, and the guys took it very seriously in interviews. And, it wasn't an over-the-top product like it is today. And so I think a lot of them now are still reeling from the fact that pro wrestling deceived them so many years ago and lied to them so many years ago. But in any case, though, Chris, I think their excuse to getting out of good journalism when it comes to pro wrestling is it's pro wrestling. Who cares? I don't care if it's true, and I don't care if, I made a mistake. Ultimate Warrior isn't wrestling now. He is, he isn't. I don't care. It doesn't matter because it's pro wrestling. That's the idea behind it.
Want to take a quick minute and shout out to our sponsor, barbershopwindow.com. Use the discount code VOW for 10% off. Got some great Macho Man Randy Savage shirts over there, Andre the Giant. Plus, they have just a ton of really, really cool wrestling T-shirts. So make sure you go check them out at barbershopwindow.com. And as I said, make sure you use the discount code VOW to get your purchase. And definitely want to move on. And I want to talk a little bit about Sting because, Nick, I know that a lot of people have been reporting, and it seems like, if I'm not mistaken, the last I heard, maybe there was some conflicting reports when it comes to Sting and his signing. Most people in the last few days, a few days ago, reported that Sting had definitely signed a contract with the WWE. And one of the latest reports that I heard was that, or I read, was that he had the contract, that it was pretty much wrapped up, but he actually hasn't physically sent the contract back. So first and foremost, Nick, let's talk a little bit about Sting. And I guess my question to you is, what's the latest and what do you know?
Well, that is the latest. The latest is that, it was reported that Sting had signed a contract, but in reality, Sting had been sent the contract by WWE, and he is expected to sign. Now, WWE had expected even, well before WrestleMania that Sting would be signing the contract. They agreed to the terms, they agreed to the deal, and they sent him the paperwork. Again, it's just a matter of putting pen to paper. And, we are hearing that there's no holdup on Sting's end. It's not like he read the deal and is unhappy with it or something like that. It's just a matter of the fact that he has not signed it yet. So, once the deal does get signed, apparently we'll see him work television dates. It didn't say anything specifically about wrestling matches other than he would appear on television, but it did note that he won't, let's not expect him to be a regular. Whatever his role in TNA was, do not expect that to be his role in WWE. It will not be a regular wrestling role, if it's even a regular on-camera role in a non-wrestling capacity. It might not even be that. But, Chris, we talked about this, of course, before the streak ended, and we touched on it, I think, a little bit last week. But, now that the streak is over, and, these Sting rumors that have just been flying for years now, it seems like every year, starting around January, heading into WrestleMania, it's always, what's Sting going to do? Is he coming to WWE? Well, now that the streak is over, is that a very important question anymore?
I think that one of the reports that I read, actually, another report, but not from the most credible source in the world, so I won't really put that over, but credible enough that it's going to make me talk about it, and that maybe he actually is going to have more than one match. Obviously, I think if all things were perfect, he'd probably have one match. It'd probably be at WrestleMania next year, and it'd be against the Undertaker, and that would be the end of it. But with Undertaker's health in question, and of course, not knowing if that match is going to take place now, it wouldn't surprise me if they went in a completely different direction, still knowing that at the end of the day, they can have the Undertaker-Sting match if they want to, but they also give themselves an out. And that out, in my mind, is probably Sting working another match or two prior to WrestleMania next year. So I guess, though, to answer your question, Nick, I'm interested in seeing Sting. I think a year is not very long if you're limiting kind of what you're doing with him. And it is ultimately to try and build up to a WrestleMania match with The Undertaker. You might you're bringing him back, if you are bringing him back, just specifically to kind of get warmed up for that. And then obviously if something goes awry and Undertaker is not ready to go for next year, then you can always go in a different direction with Sting. It's not like Sting can't wrestle. So in my mind, I'm interested in seeing him. Maybe I'm a little disappointed that it's not against The Undertaker at the end of the day, but I'm interested in seeing Sting, period. I'm a huge Sting fan, always have been. I'm definitely interested in seeing him in a WWE ring. But I would still ultimately like to see him against The Undertaker. I just think that makes sense. And I would have been perfectly fine with the one and done for Sting. But now, with The Undertaker's situation the way it is, I'll be okay with Sting working a couple other matches if that's the way they decide to go. I definitely don't think you completely void it. I don't think you completely nix the idea or 86 it because of The Undertaker's condition. I think a lot of fans would be interested in seeing Sting there. I'm curious, though, Nick, in your mind, I know for me, I want to see him as my favorite Sting, which is the Crow gimmick, but I don't think everybody believes that or agrees with that. I would like to see that. I think that's something that always in pro wrestling got me, kind of that mysterious, dark thing. That's why the Undertaker matchup was always so intriguing to so many people, and it made sense. Maybe it didn't make sense beyond that, but it made sense because their gimmicks were very, very similar in that regard. I've always been a big fan of that Sting. Of course, that was in the peak of my childhood, the Monday Night Wars, his feud with the NWO, with Hogan specifically. That's what I remember about Sting the best. But some of his recent work with TNA isn't bad. I'm just kind of curious, Nick. I mean, do you feel like Sting gets over today with the Crow gimmick? I mean, can you show him in the rafters? Those lights go out and then the spotlight's up in the rafters. I mean, can you go that extra mile? Can you go that far with today's fans knowing how they are? And of course, with Sting specifically, do you feel like they can get away with that, at this point in time?
Yeah, you could get away with it. I mean, you could get away with it much like you still can the Undertaker's gimmick. I mean, it's going to work for the Undertaker. It's going to work for Sting because it's worked for Sting before. Does that mean they necessarily have to? I mean, if they don't announce his return, in some form of vignette, then sure, it would be cool to see some kind of, there's hints being dropped, and then of course he appears from the rafters or something like that. But I think equally maybe as cool, because we haven't seen it in so long, is, you could just go back to that, it was back when Sting was actually wearing face paint similar to the Warrior. And he had the bleach blonde, the spiky hair. I don't know if you could still pull that hairdo off, but he had the makeup and the blonde hair. We haven't seen it in a really long time, so it might be cool to kind of go back to that and see that version of Sting as well. But I think either way would be great. Someone said I like Joker Sting in TNA. That actually was pretty entertaining. But I think if you're going to go back, I think you'd either have to go back to that Crow gimmick or that that face paint blonde hair. Well,
and I think the Crow gimmick is what most fans will remember of Sting. And I don't think WWE will ever give a nod to TNA by letting him do the Joker gimmick.
No,
so
God, no.
Yeah, so in my mind, I think the Crow gimmick or maybe the bleach blonde, which again, because of his age, I think the age allows him to get away with the Crow gimmick a lot easier than it does, kind of that Hollywood blonde, gimmick that he had, which I think a lot of people probably enjoyed a lot. But for me, I'm with you. I like the Crow gimmick. I do think that he could get away with it, and I think that's what fans would recognize him as more. So personally, I go that route. And I know as a fan, I mark out for the Crow gimmick. If the lights go out and I see him up in the rafters, I don't think you'll ever see him come down from the rafters. I don't think they're going to propel him down at this point because of just the risk involved, obviously. But I don't think that's necessary. You can find neat ways to get him into the ring or enter him with just the lights going on and he just shows up in the ring. There's a lot of ways you can kind of get away with that mysterious dark gimmick that he obviously pulled off so well. during kind of the peak of the Monday Night Wars. So I'm looking forward to that. But real quick, Mike, your thoughts on Sting, and do you have any idea, like, when do you think the time frame would be that maybe Sting actually shows up in WWE?
The fact that he hasn't sent that contract back, and the fact that WWE didn't fly him in specifically to their office in Stamford and say, sign this contract on the bottom line right now, tells me that it's not going to be immediately. If WWE wanted to bring him in the next couple of months, he would have been under contract and they'd already be working up creative plans. The simple fact that they just kind of...
Plus, he was in Mania, too. I mean, he was in
New
Mania.
Orleans. So there's no telling who he met with or didn't meet with.
They've had plenty of time. They've been working on this forever.
But
I'm surprised the contract's not signed.
The thing is, the fact that they just mailed it to him and they kind of said, do it on your own time, kind of tells me there's no strict plans.
Yeah.
To me, they could just do as simple as what they did with Warrior this year. Like, bring him in, put him into the Hall of Fame, let him appear on Monday Night Raw. I would like to see them get at least 1 or 2 matches out of him, because unlike, he needs to spend the next six months or so getting into better shape, because the last thing I want to do is see T-shirt Sting in a ring at WrestleMania. But if you'll allow me a platform for another 2 minutes, I just want to say I might be the only person that I've heard that doesn't want to see Sting versus Undertaker at WrestleMania. From a storytelling point of view, it's perfect. It writes itself. Like, they could do just what Triple H did 3 years ago. Now is just 4 years ago for the first one, is they both go into the ring, stare at the WrestleMania sign, and then the match is booked. Like that's all they have to do, and fans will go crazy. And from a storytelling perspective, that's great. From a booking perspective, though, just thinking about it is a nightmare. First of all, who do you have win? You're telling me you're gonna have Sting, one of the biggest legends, the biggest name that's never worked for Vince McMahon, the last remaining relic from WCW. You're going to bring him into WrestleMania, and then he's going to lose his one and only match in a WWE ring. To what end? To give The Undertaker a win the year after he lost the streak. I mean, personally, I don't even think we're going to see Undertaker at WrestleMania again. And I'm not sure, if you think about it, Undertaker's best matches, he can go, and you have to take this year's out of the picture because he got a concussion. It's not his fault. But Punk carried a lot of that match. Triple H carried most of the physicality of those matches. He was still in good enough shape with Shawn that they put on some of the best matches in WrestleMania history. Sting has never been on a Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair level. He's a great character and a good wrestler, but I'm not sure at however old he is, if he's still in the same shape that I saw him in January for his Genesis Impact Wrestling match. I do not want to see that Sting against this year's Undertaker at WrestleMania 31, because that will go down as one of the worst, most disappointing debuts and matches in WrestleMania history.
And
I agree, because look, if that was the thing. We saw the status of Undertaker, and again, I know we have to factor in that he was concussed, and I don't know how much better he would have been if he wasn't. And we know the limitations potentially of Sting right now. Really, the only thing that was keeping it interesting was the streak, and whether or not, would Sting be the guy that comes in and ends the streak as the outsider who had never been in WWE before. That was really the only point in Sting versus The Undertaker to me. Seeing that as that technical match that we know a guy like Undertaker could have with a Shawn Michaels or even a Triple H, or the brawl that we really expected from The Undertaker versus Brock Lesnar. We're not going to see any of that with Sting as the opponent. So really the only hook to this match is really break the streak. For my money, seeing Undertaker versus Cena, same story. The only hook to that match is, will Cena be the guy that ends the streak?
Right.
Now that the streak is over, and, again, that's why I still go back to asking that same question I asked last week after he lost. Does The Undertaker need to retire? Do we ever need to see The Undertaker in the ring anymore after he lost at WrestleMania? And For my money, the answer is no. I don't think we ever need to see him wrestle again.
Moving on, don't forget, by the way, guys, check out our sponsor, barbershopwindow.com. Use the discount code VOW for 10% off. And thanks for tuning in. Voice of Wrestling, Chris Cash, Nick Paglino, special guest, Mike Killam of course, WrestleZone.com. And want to move on, Nick. I know one of the things that you wanted to discuss this week, and I agree with you 100%, was TNA made some news this week. And obviously, coming off the heels of WrestleMania, it might be for the wrong reasons, and that's what some people are arguing. Eric Young won the number one contendership and then goes on and wins on a live edition of Impact and defeats Magnus to become the new TNA World Heavyweight Champion. And, I haven't noticed a ton. It seems like I've seen a little bit here and there, though, about how fans are kind of reacting to this, and I think primarily it's WWE fans, WWE loyalists compared to TNA fans. I don't know that TNA fans are acting this way, but I am curious to see and to maybe dig a little bit more into how TNA fans feel about TNA's decision of putting the title on Eric Young. But the criticism is coming from the fact that they believe it was a knee-jerk reaction. It was maybe a bad decision or a bad reaction to what WWE has and what they've made and created with Daniel Bryan. And that may be because of even the physical similarities of Eric Young and Daniel Bryan, that TNA, that's the reason they made this decision. Now, before, Nick, you and I get into our thoughts about this, I want to ask Mike if you've actually heard a little bit, I know you have watched the TNA product a little closer in the past than we have, but as far as the reaction from the fans, have you heard about some of this negative criticism toward the product and toward Dixie and TNA's decision of putting the title on Eric Young, and that it was basically just a rip-off of WWE? Have you gotten some sort of sense that this is the way some fans feel? And do you think that it carries over to the actual TNA fans and that this is not just WWE fans that just like to bash TNA? Do you think it's more than that, or it's just a case of WWE fans being assholes?
It's hard to tell because most of the people in my circles, the ones
Oh, sorry. Start that over. Nobody was hearing you. Go ahead. Now you can go.
Get your shit together, Chris.
I know.
It's hard to say because a lot of the people in my circles and the people that I talk to and read are people like Mark Madden and people like myself and people like Kevin Kelly from our website and people like you, and we all kind of feel the same way. But as far as, I'll be honest with you, I don't have a lot of just straight up TNA fans on my social media timeline. I don't get, I think everything I've heard has been kind of negative. I haven't actually gone out of my way to say anything about it for two reasons. One, I haven't been watching because there's just simply not enough time in the week. And right now, they have a great roster and a great amount of talent, but there's just nothing making me come back every single week. And two, I just want to wait for it to play out. You know what I mean? Like, it may not... It looks on paper like a knee-jerk reaction to what happened at WrestleMania, but it might not end up being... They may not have any plans at all. The real quick, you had mentioned, and people throw Dixie Carter into the equation a lot. I just want to say she's not the end-all, be-all of creative decisions. She's not
it's true.
The Vince McMahon of the of TNA, rather. A lot of that creative heat, if you're going to blame anyone, blame Big John, who's pretty much the end-all, be-all of creative decision-making. So I just like clearing that up because there's a big difference between the owner of a company and the person fully in charge of all of their booking decisions.
Well, but I think as the owner of the company, obviously people are looking at her as the one that can put somebody else in that position if he's not doing a good job. So, they can always do that. Ultimately, it does kind of rest on her shoulders, especially as involved as she is with the company. If she's getting a lot of negative feedback, and I know from my own personal contacts and stuff like that TNA is a company, and WWE does it as well, but TNA, without a question, reads the internet. They know what's going on. They kind of have their finger on the pulse of what fans are saying or what critics are saying or what the pundits are saying. I believe that they really do. So I know that if for some reason TNA is not having, I believe Dixie Carter is somebody that you can definitely point the finger at, but I understand where you're coming from creatively. Yeah. She's not trying to say, hey, I'm somebody that needs to be running the creative of my company, so I'm trying to put people that I trust to be there.
And on that note, there are a lot of people in that company, including Dixie, who do read internet websites and dirt sheets and stuff. And I get tweets and text messages and emails from people that work inside TNA. They're a lot more accessible with people like us because they're not the giant company that WWE is. They don't have to protect themselves as much as the WWE does. But if you want to, one of the former wrestlers who doesn't work there anymore told me if you that Dixie does read a lot of the stuff, especially on sites like WrestleZone, the higher traffic websites. She does read a lot of the stuff, and she goes and reads comments. And if you really want to make an impact, a lot of the times you get a better response if you can state your opinions and you can state them clearly without cursing out Dixie and slandering her name. If you just go out there and say, this is what I don't like, you're going to get a lot, which is why I'm not casting judgment. Until I actually watch the product, I'm not going to, and watch how it evolves over the next couple weeks. Just give it time,
Well, and I'll be one of those that'll tell you, and Nick, I don't know, I mean, you don't write a ton of opinionated stuff on WrestleZone. I'll be one to cast judgment. I like casting judgment when it deserves to be cast. I will say this much, though, as far as TNA is concerned, I do think in part this was some sort of attempt to kind of ride off of WWE's success. And I think that's where it sits, though, and I'm not going to say that it was a bad decision. When you look at what TNA has done or what stars they have really at the end of this thing, I think Magnus had a good run. I don't know that Magnus really, at the time of when he won the title, he was my first choice. In fact, now here's what I do think. I think all signs led to Samoa Joe for months in this point, with TNA. And I really feel like they decided they were going to get on Samoa Joe's bandwagon. And in my mind, it's like, where the hell have you been and why did it take so long? But I was really looking forward to that story being told. And I do think, having said all of that to an extent, this was some sort of knee-jerk reaction as well. But I am going to say that I think that Eric Young is an okay choice. And I look at their roster, and with what he's got going on with the Animal Planet and his shows and everything that he's doing, he's getting more mainstream press than 95% of their roster, most likely, if not more. I mean, he may be getting more mainstream press than anybody on that roster does. So I really didn't mind it as much. I like Eric Young. I think he's good. I think that he's really over with their core base, which I believe that you've got to try and target. You need to quit worrying so much about what the WWE loyalists are going to say and those that really do not follow your product yet just want to criticize you because it's easy to do. So I'm not going to have any problem with it. Now, Nick, I know you and I were talking about this off the air, and I think you tend to kind of agree with me, and that maybe it's WWE bashers just being, or WWE loyalists just being TNA bashers because it's the fun thing to do. It's easy to do. But at the same time, the argument people are making, there's a legitimate argument there. I mean, I do think that TNA made the decision to slap the title on Eric Young, and I don't think that it was planned for months. So, I mean, at the end of the day, maybe they're right, but was it necessarily the wrong choice?
Well, that's the question. I don't necessarily know that Eric Young is the guy that you want to put the title on, but, and I agree. I think where I disagree with most of the IWC is that, yes, I agree putting the title on Eric Young on Impact was a direct reaction to WrestleMania. I agree that there are, of course, similarities, physical similarities between Daniel Bryan and Eric Young. I agree that to a certain extent, the bearded sort of comic, Daniel Bryan's a funny-looking guy. The announcers are always making fun of him looking like a goat. And, and Eric Young has those traits as well. It's sort of taking that essence of Daniel Bryan. Absolutely. Is it sort of riding the coattails of the popularity of professional wrestling in the immediate aftermath of WrestleMania. Yes. Here's where I differ, I think, from most of the IWC. I don't blame TNA for doing it. You should do it. You know, in the peak of WrestleMania, in the week before, in the week after, that's when people are going to wrestling websites. They want more news. They want to read reactions. They want to know, well, the streak just ended, you know, and then, of course, you know, Daniel Bryan is the new champion. Cesaro getting a big push at WrestleMania. I want to find out more about that. I want to see how people are reacting to it online. I absolutely agree. Not only do I agree, I wholeheartedly suggest TNA. Now it's time for TNA to say, hey, I want to remind everybody, we're here too. So how do you make a splash? You do something. You hot shot a title change like they did. You know, again, in the long run, will that be the best move that they can make? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. I would have to guess probably not. And hot shotting is never a great idea. But look at other promotions like Jeff Jarrett. What did he do? He waited till the day after WrestleMania, the Monday after WrestleMania, to announce Global Force Wrestling is coming out, his new promotion. You know, I'm writing on WrestleZone. I'm working on wrestling, reporting backstage reports about Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker's match just the day before. I'm reporting backstage updates and fallout coming out of WrestleMania. And then I post breaking news. Jeff Jarrett announces new promotion. That was perfect timing for Jarrett to do that. He knew he was capitalizing on the audience that was out there. You promotions like WrestleCon and Ring of Honor that have historically ran events in the city that WrestleMania is taking place during that weekend. You have to capitalize on it in some way. Now, was Eric Young the choice? Is he the guy to go to? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure that when the dust settles, you know, fans are really going to care that Eric Young is the new TNA heavyweight champion. But for TNA to do something like that in the midst of WrestleMania, I completely understand.
I think where we all agree is that it's not so much people arguing. If people are arguing that Eric Young is not the right guy to put the title on, then argue that. But to simply be arguing, hey, they're copying off of WWE, and that's the issue that they have with them. So what? It doesn't, you know, at the end of the day, who cares? It happens all the time in wrestling. Everything is recycled. And I go back to what they did with Samoa Joe and Abyss and that pay-per-view match. Huh?
Said with the ninjas?
With the ninjas. You know, I think unfortunately, you know, even if that would have played out well, even if TNA would have pulled that and delivered that whole thing well, I think fans would have still shit on it. It wouldn't have mattered what they did with that match and with that finish. They would have crapped all over it because they were copying WWE. And I think that's the wrong argument to make. I think that's the wrong argument that I see made over and over again when it comes to TNA. And let me just say, Frank and Joe of Wrestle Reaction, they'll be coming on later on, immediately after Raw. They're probably tuning in now. Big fans of their show, big friends of both of them. But at the same time, you know, they're a lot like the guys that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about, that rarely give TNA a chance anymore, that don't watch the product, but it's easy to criticize them. It's very easy to do. And Joe and Frank are very guilty of that as well. I think Nick and I have been guilty of it occasionally as well, even.
Absolutely.
I think, though, that the easy thing to do is not give them a chance because for whatever reason, they lost your interest a long time ago, and now all of a sudden, you know, they do something that is just quick to think and compare or do this or do that, and it doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad decision. But it is, I mean, I do think the argument could be made that Eric Young is not your guy. I never saw star quality in Eric Young. I kind of thought he was a good bit player. I think he's funny, he's comedic, he's good, but as a world champion, I think they played his funny bit way too long. It would be like Santino in a couple of years being the champion of WWE.
Yes, but remember Elimination Chamber 2 or 3 years ago, when Bryan was defending his World Heavyweight Championship inside the Elimination Chamber, and one of those competitors was Santino, and when he came this close to becoming world champion, those like 18 to 20,000 people in that arena,
that's a heat of the moment
blew up. Yes, but every time Eric Young is the most over babyface in that entire company. I've been to 2 TNA live events, and when he's not even on the card, people start chanting for EY the entire time. I don't necessarily think that EY is the wrong choice. At the time, maybe they jumped the gun a little bit but let's not fail to mention that the same people that are now saying EY isn't the guy and he's a comedy jobber and we shouldn't be putting him in this spotlight are the same people who bitch and moan on the internet every single time EY comes out saying, I wish they would treat this guy with more respect. I wish he were doing something that wasn't a comedy thing. I wish they would give him an actual title shot. So they did. Calm down. Let's wait out and see how he plays out. People love him. Let's give it a chance before we just decide to write it off.
And I will agree with that, and I do think that to an extent Eric Young is a guy that in TNA for sure, because he's such a company guy, in a lot of ways he is kind of a good comparison to Daniel Bryan for them. You know, I mean, he's a good comparison to Daniel Bryan in terms of kind of what he's meant to that company, what he's become for that company, and obviously it doesn't hurt that he's got the Animal Planet stuff going on, that he's got some good mainstream press, and maybe it's not a huge audience that he's reaching outside of TNA, but it's an audience nonetheless, and they need that. You know, they need that help, and I think
if nothing else, Spike TV needs that.
Well,
awareness.
I think TNA needs it because they're going to lose Spike TV if they don't get it.
Maybe they can do Impact Wrestling on Animal Planet next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I will say the last thing that I want to talk about, and then of course we will, before we get out of here, talk about the Raw match. It was just announced as far as Intercontinental Championship, a tournament of some kind being that's going to play out on Raw tonight, or at least begin or start, or I don't know, for the Intercontinental Championship. And we'll talk a little bit about that and, of course, preview Raw. But it is the fact, I mean, kind of what we've been talking about in the internet wrestling community. And, Nick, I guess I wanted to start it off and open the table up to you just to ask, does the internet wrestling community at this point, I mean, is it too early to tell even, but WrestleMania and some of the stuff that they've been able to accomplish, I guess you could say, but the internet wrestling community and kind of the way that things have been shifting, and we talked about this last week, but do you feel like the internet wrestling community has got this certain sense of or this level of cockiness even? I mean, with what they did with Daniel Bryan and the way they acted even the following Monday, which is a notorious rowdy crowd, but at the end of the day, do you feel like WWE actually will be listening to these guys going forward? How much do you think it will carry on as far as the way the internet wrestling community can kind of, interact in a live audience or a live show, how they can kind of put their own mark and spin on a show? Do you expect that to happen as much as we've seen it in the last couple of months and, of course, over the weekend of WrestleMania, Nick? Or do you think that stuff's going to die down as we go on?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think we're already seeing, to a certain extent, the internet wrestling community starting to turn its back just a little bit on Daniel Bryan. Because, I think a little bit. I'm already starting to see a little bit of, negative, just sort of, all right, we're kind of getting tired of Daniel Bryan a little bit. I'm seeing it. I don't know if other people, it's not massive.
Right.
It's not like everybody's revolting against the guy. But I think, people are already, I'm already seeing some commentary that's suggesting, maybe it wasn't handled properly or it was too little too late or something along those lines. And, and that I think kind of dictates, the direct correlation to this kind of, attitude that we have nowadays. It's sort of, I want something, I want it now, and then as soon as I get it,
I'm over.
I want the next thing.
Yeah,
I'm over
and
it.
I feel like we've got a sense of that. In general,
I just got a 50-inch TV. I liked it for a week, and now I want a 60-inch TV.
Right.
I get tired of the toy. And you also have to remember that if someone's MO is to constantly criticize, they're not doing it right. They're not giving me what I want. I want this, I want this, I want this. They're not giving me what I want. This company sucks because this company never gives me what I want. Well, then they do what you want, you don't have anything to complain about anymore.
Yep.
You got to find something to complain about, right? So, you're going to now find something else. Well, I'm glad Daniel Bryan won, but I can't stand that Batista is still in WWE. I love that Daniel Bryan won, but I can't believe they paired Cesaro with Paul Heyman. Now Cesaro is done. His career is over. Or what are they trying to do here? Or, if it's not one thing, then it's another thing,
Yeah.
And I have seen some of that in the early, aftermath of WrestleMania 30.
Well, I think it's something to watch out for, because I do feel like now that they actually have accomplished kind of that goal they were after, which they've done in the past. I mean, it's not like this is the first time we've ever seen the smart fans kind of really start a movement and actually get their way. I mean, just to pop, off the top of my head, I remember Matt Hardy and his situation from way back when. Now, of course, Matt Hardy got buried at the end of it, and fans finally, got over it and got kind of off that bandwagon. And I haven't seen anything like that with Daniel Bryan yet, but it won't surprise me. I mean, it won't surprise me if wrestling fans get over Daniel Bryan quicker than you would have assumed, with as much momentum as he had going into Mania and obviously in the immediate aftermath. So it won't surprise me in any bit. I think we're spoiled little brats as a collective unit. And by the way, before everybody starts sending me hate mail, realize I'm grouping myself in that deal. I do think that as wrestling fans and probably as a society as a whole, I think, with other forms of entertainment too, I'm sure wrestling fans are not the only one, that whoever the makers of the entertainment that you're watching are having to deal with, these fans that can't make their minds up. Episodic TV and stuff probably tries to feed off of the response that they get from their study groups and things like that. And I would imagine that anytime they decide to give, their fans what they seem to be asking for, they turn on them too. So it's not like wrestling fans are probably the only one, but I think just as a general whole, I think as those that watch and whatever form of entertainment it is, I mean, just as a society in general, I do think that our attention span, there's so many things to want or like or get your hands on. It's very difficult to really keep your attention. I think attention spans have just dwindled down to very little, and that's going to be the obstacle for Daniel Bryan to overcome, and for any wrestling superstar to overcome going forward, I believe. So it really will be interesting to see how they consistently handle Daniel Bryan every week. If WWE is going to legitimately jump, kind of on his shoulders and try to ride the wave as long as they can and do him right. If they are legitimately going to do that, if they're truthfully going to try, it will be really interesting to see how they decide to do it and attempt to do it going forward. Before we wrap up and get out of here, though, I'm kind of curious. Nick, as far as I know, I saw that the network or WWE, whatever, sent something out on my phone. Intercontinental Championship, #1 contenders match, right? I mean, it's not the championship match. We don't know any of the participants, or do we?
We don't know any of them. We just know the tournament kicks off tonight. They didn't even really, my assumption is that it'll probably lead up until Extreme Rules, but they didn't even really say that. They just said a tournament will begin tonight.
Which I'm all for from a standpoint of them starting something for the IC title, but I mean, I'm going to throw it out there now. I don't know what everybody else stands or where everybody else stands in this, in our, threesome panel here, but I believe personally this is all setting up Cesaro.
I was just going to say that.
I imagine Cesaro.
It could be Cesaro or it could be Swagger. Because they actually had there's been a Biggie Swagger program kind of teased. I kind of thought maybe they would go Cesaro Swagger for the next pay-per-view, and then maybe they would pick up with the Swagger Biggie program, but you don't know. Like it could be. They could just be trying to, because now they're trying to get Cesaro over as a heel with Heyman. They could have just separated the two factions and their two managers and now have Swagger go after the U.S. title while they have Cesaro do something else.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I think that the interview that Paul Heyman did with Michael Cole for WWE, kind of the Triple H style interview that he did, to me just seemed to indicate that was going to be kind of what he did. Was he's going to have an IC run with Brock out of the way. I mean, some gold around, Paul Heyman is kind of the way I look at it even right now. I think makes sense. So I'm going to go with most likely Cesaro. Won't be surprised if Swagger gets a small run with it, but didn't they do like a quick thing at a house show or something? Or did I dream that?
Yeah, there was a brief switch this week with the house show, but the referee reversed the decision because I think Zeb got involved or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's probably, unfortunately, the closest that Swagger's going to get to.
I don't think they
even.
want to. I also just thought of they need to, I've been saying this for weeks, they need to get Cesaro the F away from Big E, because Big E has been trying to get over as a babyface for like months, and they keep putting him with guys like Ziggler, guys like Cesaro, guys that people are gonna cheer for against Big E, despite the fact that he is the babyface champion. And if they put Cesaro, they're not gonna successfully get him over as a heel, and B, they're not gonna successfully get Big E over as a face.
Well, they're not gonna get Big E successfully over as a face unless they actually try to do anything with Big E to get him over as a babyface.
Yeah.
And they haven't done anything with him.
This is unfortunate because you just look at the guy and notice how much potential he has if they actually
I think he does have
pulled
potential.
the trigger and did anything.
But I don't, they haven't done anything.
Genetic freak.
They put him with Sheamus and John Cena, and that's like a freaking nail in the coffin for the guy.
When he was with Punk for a while, people cared for like a week.
No, I think that it's going to be interesting to see. I really do think it is setting up Cesaro 100%. I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
I'm going to put my money on Swagger.
Usually setting up something, because they usually don't do these tournament things and then have the reigning champion just retain.
Yeah.
It's usually a place to set up somebody.
I hope to God it's not Bo Dallas.
Who knows? I don't necessarily know if I want to see Cesaro in that role right now, because, I think he could actually, he could be moving on to bigger and better things. He's sort of on that line. But, honestly, with the Paul Heyman pairing, I'm not sure really what to make of that right now. I don't really know how they're trying to get over Cesaro. The initial reaction to that for me was, are they getting Cesaro over as a heel, or are they trying to get Heyman over as a face now? It was an odd pairing. I'm still sort of waiting to see how that's going to play out in terms of what kind of a relationship do they want those guys to have.
Well, and it's going to depend on where they're at, too. The live crowds, like I said, are such an indicator right now. They play such a part in what wrestling has and what as far as just the wrestling business in general. The live audiences, depending on what type of crowd they are, they're becoming rowdier and rowdier, which in some ways are really good. In some ways, it's very difficult because it's hard to know exactly which way you want to go with somebody. Big E was a babyface and supposed to still be a babyface. Cesaro, I think they want to play off of kind of the heel thing. With Paul Heyman, I think that's the way they want to go. But it's really interesting because I think the smart fans are really interested in that pairing. They like that pairing. So to Mike's point, it's kind of like you want to get him, Cesaro, away from Big E if you actually want to do something with Big E, but I'm not sure they do anymore. And I don't think they see Cesaro as a world title guy anytime soon. I think Brock Lesnar is obviously the next guy as far as Paul Heyman is concerned. I think they'll play off of that. And again, if you see that interview that he did with Michael Cole, I think that kind of, again, gave me the indication that they're going to probably keep him out of the world title picture, and the Intercontinental Championship is probably going to be the direction they want to go in. But we'll see if that's the case tonight. We'll probably get a good indication of kind of what they want to do with this tournament and who might be there at the end of it. One would imagine that we'd at least know the competitors after tonight. So, guys, live tweet with us, of course, during Raw. Enjoy Raw, everybody. And until next week, for Nick Paglino and Mike Killam, I am Chris Cash. Check out voiceofwrestling.com, and as always, continue to support WrestleZone.com. We'll see you next week, right here on The Voice of Wrestling.
feeling real good. Came a long way from misunderstood. Far away from the days where I wouldn't wanna go home, cause I was afraid of the truth. See, I was scared to admit the feeling was in the back of my head. Cause the point where line no longer works, so you have to stand up for how you wanna live.